Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. Thanks for watching. This is fun, huh? Can we, real quick, before we get started, can you give an emoji round of applause for Sean McGee, who did all of my hosting sections? Sean, he is a good friend of mine. I love that he got to be on camera. He was a little nervous, but I think he did great. If you've never met Sean, he is the most servant-hearted person I know. So if you are ever at the Perrysburg, Oregon campus and you see Sean, make sure you go and say hello. He is an amazing human being. Well, hey, this is fun. I get an opportunity to preach to you all, which I know is a little bit different, right? You're used to seeing someone on stage giving the message, so this might feel a little weird. Trust me, though, we are both feeling the awkwardness of it. Every other campus pastor has a live audience that they can interact with. All I've got is this camera to talk to, and Dylan's here. He's listening attentively, all right? But I am imagining every one of your faces, okay? Now, the one benefit I do have is that all the campus pastors, they have to get all fancy, right? Because they're being on stage. They're seen by everyone. I just wear a fancy shirt. I've got a swimsuit and flip-flops on below here. So anyway, I do have a request to make of you. This is live. This is not pre-recorded. So if you could do me a favor, I would love for you to engage in the chat if you're there. If you're on the website or if you're on YouTube, I would love for you to ask questions, make comments, post your remarks if you disagree with a point that I'm making. At a campus, it's frowned upon if you're talking while the message is going on. But here, you have an opportunity to engage with the message without being a distraction to me. Afterwards, I'll look through the chat and maybe, hopefully, I'll learn something from you. Now, if you are someone who gets distracted with all the back and forth chatting, then ignore the chat portion and just lean into the message that I get to give. We've got one more bad boy of the Bible that we are going to look at. And honestly, it was tough. There are a lot of bad boys in the Bible. And what I love about the Bible is that it's honest. It doesn't shy away from sharing the real and the hard and the messy. I mean, last week, we learned about a guy and his wife dropping dead after lying to Peter. Nuts, okay? Well, hashtag real talk, though. How many of you tried a little harder not to lie this week? You went through the old Rolodex in your mind, trying to remember if you'd ever lied to your campus pastor or to Ben, afraid you might fall down dead, right? Well, it was good to have Josh Whitlow back here to preach that message on Ananias. And today, we're going to talk about Samson, the Bible's version of Hercules. Some of you may have heard this story in Sunday school, so we will look at the historical context surrounding Samson, what made Samson a bad boy of the Bible, and finally, what life lessons we can learn from Samson's mistakes. So let's jump in. The story of Samson can be found in the book of Judges, the 7th book of the Bible, found in the Old Testament. Many Jewish scholars, they believe that it was written by Samuel to the Jewish people to give the history of Israel before the monarchy began, which Ben talked about in week 1 with the first king of Israel, Saul. It was also to serve as a warning to the consequences of religious unfaithfulness. Now, this was during the time when judges led Israel, but don't think courtroom judges. The judges who led were military or political leaders, okay? Now, the book, it continues to follow the journey of the Israelites, who were once enslaved by Pharaoh and the Egyptians, and then freed by the leadership of Moses. We're all aware of this if you've seen the 10 Commandments, right? And they're finally brought into the land that God promised them. A land that was currently occupied. Now, this was in a time where entire tribes were made extinct by conquering nations. Think of it as a giant game of Risk. Who doesn't love Risk? The key to survival was to conquer and take over land or be conquered and eliminated, or at the very least, conform to the beliefs and the way of life of the conquering nation. So God commanded the Israelites to drive out the other nations from the land to avoid moral corruption and the worshiping of false idols. Well, guess who failed to do what they were told? That's right, the Israelites. A phrase that is constantly repeated in the book of Judges is, once again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. And as a result of their disobedience, Israel became oppressed by the nations they failed to drive out. And in their oppression, they would cry out to God to be rescued. The book of Judges, it's cyclical. The Israelites sin, become enslaved, cry out to God. God sends them a deliverer, aka judge. They experience peace, and then they fall back into sin. Rinse and repeat. Honestly, it's a lot like my kids. And kids, I know you're watching right now. Pay attention. My daughter hits my son. My son cries out for mom and dad. Mom and dad hand out a consequence to daughter. Peace is restored. Son sticks his tongue out at daughter. Daughter hits son again. Rinse and repeat. The book of Judges, it shows the complete and utter failure of the Israelite nation to do what God asked. Y'all, this book is disturbing. It's messed up. It's full of horrors and atrocities that you would find in an R-rated movies. Get your kids out of the room if you're reading the book of Judges. So, who's ready to dive in, huh? Yes, let's go. Let's do it. So, we're going to start our story in Judges chapter 13. We're going to look at verses 1 through 5. And it says this: Again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. So the Lord delivered them into the hands of the Philistines for 40 years. You might recognize the word Philistines. Goliath, the infamous Goliath, was a Philistine. Okay? Keep going with verse. A certain man of Zorah named Manoah from the clan of the Danites had a wife who was childless, unable to give birth. The angel of the Lord appeared to her and said, "You are barren and childless, but you are going to become pregnant and give birth to a son. Now, see to it that you drink no wine or other fermented drink, and that you do not eat anything unclean. You will become pregnant and have a son whose head is never to be touched by a razor, because the boy is to be a Nazirite, dedicated to God from the womb. He will lead in delivering Israel the hands of the Philistines," right? He's going to lead them from the hands of the Philistines. So we read that once again, the Israelites have disobeyed God. They've done evil, and now they're under the control of the Philistines. Yet God, he announces through an angel's visit that a deliverer will be born. Sound familiar? Huh? A deliverer who will free the Israelites from Philistine control. Now, this boy will be dedicated to God as a Nazirite. And you're probably thinking, what is a Nazirite? Thank you for asking. I'm going to answer. A Nazirite was a person who made a vow to be dedicated to God for a specific period of time. And during this period, they were to abstain from all alcoholic beverages, grapes, grape skin, all that. Never shave their head, and avoid going near dead bodies. Easy, piece of cake. Who wouldn't want to do that? So let us welcome to the stage our main character, Samson. And now, our author of Judges wastes no time in showing us what kind of person Samson is. And we're going to find out. We read in Judges chapter 14 at the start, it says, Samson went down to Timnah and saw there a young Philistine woman. When he returned, he said to his father and mother, "I have seen a Philistine woman in Timnah. Now, get her for me as my wife." His father and mother replied, "Isn't there an acceptable woman among your relatives or among all our people?" But Samson said to his father, "Get her for me. She's the right one for me." Verse 4, his parents did not know that this was from the Lord, who was seeking an occasion to confront the Philistines. For at that time, they were ruling over Israel. Okay, so God, he commands the Israelite people not to intermarry with foreign nations and potentially be drawn away from God. So Samson's parents, they plead with him to look for a wife within his own people. But Samson won't have it. No. He's a child of the 80s. And like the 80s Roxette song, he's listening to his heart. And his heart says, pretty girl from Timnah. Now, pay close attention to verse 4. The author of the book takes a moment to step away from the narrative. Steps away from the narrative to remind the audience that, spoiler, this was all part of the plan to free the Israelites from Philistine control. The question that scholars and theologians have been asking for centuries is this: did God orchestrate all that's about to happen to accomplish his will and purpose, or did Samson have free will to obey or to disobey? But God, knowing Samson's heart, used it to accomplish his purpose? Discuss in the chat. Love to see the discussion. Now, it is at this point that things that really start to heat up. Let me break it down for you. First, Samson kills a lion on his way to Timnah for a little weekend visit to confirm that this Philistine woman would be his bride. Yeah, you heard that right. He kills a lion. No big deal. Who hasn't done that, right? Sometime later, he goes back to Timnah for the wedding, but he stops to admire his kill. Oh, look what I did. And there, he finds that a swarm of bees had produced honey in the carcass of the lion. Fast forward to the wedding festivities, and we find Samson telling a riddle to some Philistine men who had become his wedding party, or like groomsmen, okay? He decides to make a little wager with them, that if they can answer this riddle correctly by the end of the week, the 7 days, he would give them 30 sets of fine clothes. If they lose, they give Samson 30 sets of fine clothes. Now, I've been in this exact same situation. Let me explain. Maybe not exact same. My kids, they're obsessed with the Marvel movies. They were starting to watch them all, not chronologically, but by release date. That's important, okay? And they kept asking about Nick Fury and why he wears an eye patch. Well, every single one of us had been asking the same question for about 10 years, a decade, until Captain Marvel came out and revealed what happened to his eye. Spoiler alert, okay? So if you haven't seen the movie, get your earmuffs, put them on. I got a spoiler alert coming. You ready? If you don't want to hear it. He got a cat scratch. Yeah, a cat scratched his eye. Crazy. No one would have guessed it. So I take the opportunity to place a little bet with my kids. I say, if you can guess what happened to Nick Fury's eye, I'll give you $100 each. There's no way they're guessing it. So they start off with logical guesses. He gets injured from a fight. He falls, etc. Slowly, the logical answers fade away and completely ludicrous ones take their place. If you have young kids, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Answers involving boogers and potty humor. They're laughing, rolling on the floor like a couple of ding-dongs, completely unaware that I'm even in the room. And then, out of nowhere, my daughter mentioned something about a cat. A cat! What do I do? I am completely shocked. I have to turn around to stifle my shock because I'm sure all the color drained from my face. Whew. Now, they kept going with weird answers, so I dodged a bullet and I saved a couple $100. That was close. Now, back to the story in Samson. Several days had passed, and the men, they couldn't figure out the riddle. They went to Samson's wife, and they threatened to kill her unless she gives them the answer. So she goes to Samson, she nags him for the answer, and he eventually gives it to her She then gives it to the men, and Samson loses the bet. Now, instead of going to J.C. Penney like a normal human being to get the clothes, Samson decides to go to a neighboring town, murder 30 men, steal their clothes, and pay his end of the bargain. From there, he has a little temper tantrum and decides to go back home to his mommy and daddy. Chapter 14 ends with the line, Samson's wife was given to one of his companions who attended the feast. Weird ending. Yeah, his dad, or the girl's dad, thought Samson didn't want to marry her anymore, so he's like, well, here, you can have her. This is an important line because this would be the spark that would ignite a bloody back and forth between Samson and the Philistines. And as we read about each violent incident, remember the spoiler that the author revealed. This was all part of the plan, okay? So chapter 15, we find that Samson, he's absolutely livid. His wife was given away to someone else. And so he proclaims in verse 3, this time I have a right to get even with the Philistines. I will really harm them. And so he does what any of us would have done, right? And captures 300 foxes, ties them butt to butt by their tails, ties a flaming torch to the tails, and sets them loose in the grain fields of the Philistines. He also destroys their vineyards and olive groves, causing massive agricultural loss. So, in retaliation, the Philistines take Samson's kind of wife and her father and burn them to death. In response, Samson says, well, since they did this, I won't stop until I exact my revenge. And then he goes on a William Wallace Braveheart-like tirade and slaughters many of them. A manhunt quickly ensues, and the Philistines begin looking for Samson's whereabouts. He schemes a plot to have his fellow Israelites capture him and bring him to the Philistine army. Upon arriving, he busts loose from the ropes that were binding him and does what all of us have done from time to time, grabs a donkey's jawbone and kills 1,000 Philistines. It's just another Saturday night for Samson. And now we get to the story that many of us are familiar with. Samson and Delilah. I'm sure there are songs written about this, right? We read in Judges chapter 16, verses 4 and 5 say this. Sometime later, he fell in love with a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. The rulers of the Philistines went to her and said, see if you can lure him into showing you the secret of his great strength and how we can overpower him so we may tie him up and subdue him. Each one of us will give you 1,100 shekels of silver. Whoa, Delilah's got dollar signs in her eyes, and so she agrees. Verse 6 says, so Delilah said to Samson, tell me the secret of your great strength and how you can be tied up and subdued. Now, if I'm Samson, I'm thinking, gosh, that's a super specific question, Delilah. Secret to my strength, sure, normal, yep, everyone's asking that, but tied up and subdued? That seems a little sus, a little weird too, but Samson obliges. First, he tells her that if he's tied up with fresh bowstrings, his strength will leave him. So she ties him up with bowstrings, says, oh no, the Philistines are here. And he breaks out of them with ease. Now, Delilah is obviously upset that her man lied to her, okay? Samson, still clueless as to why she tied her up, but we won't go there. And she makes sure he is aware of how he made her look like a fool. So she asks him again, what is the source of your strength? How can I tie you up? And he gives her a fake answer. So she asks him again, and he gives her a fake answer. She asks again, and this time she's like, if you love me, you would tell me. So each time he gave her a fake answer until finally, when her nagging became too much for him to bear, not my words, Bible's words, just want to clear that up. I never say anything about women nagging, especially my wife. You've never nagged me, honey. Okay? After Delilah's nagging, he tells her the truth. This is what he says in verse 7. No razor has ever been used on my head, he said, because I have been a Nazirite dedicated to God from my mother's womb. If my head were shaved, my strength would leave me, and I would become as weak as any other man. He finally tells her the truth. And so while he's sleeping, she had his head shaved and his strength left him. The Philistines, they rush into the room, capture him. He wakes up, can't break out of the binding, and so they gouge out his eyes and take him back to Gaza. Binding him with bronze shackles, they set him to grinding grain in the prison. Samson gets his hair shaved, the source of his strength. Now, the author is up to something here. This reads like a Hollywood story, and the intended audience would have known what was going on. They would have been familiar with the Nazirite vow, familiar with the rules that go along with the vow. One of these rules being that if a Nazirite goes near a dead body, they are defiled. And to be cleansed of their defilement, they must shave their head. Do you see what is happening? Samson has been cleansed of his defilement, and the irony is that the cleansing was done at the hands of his enemy. God always finds a way to carry out his purpose. So here we have Samson. He's now a prisoner, and the Philistine rulers and all the people are celebrating that Samson was finally captured. They're in high spirits, they're drinking, they're worshiping their false god, and in high spirits from all the revelry, they demand that Samson come in and entertain them. And so we see in Judges 16, verses 26 through 30, they bring him out, and Samson said to the servant who held his hand, "Put me where I can feel the pillars that support the temple, so that I may lean against them." Now, the temple was crowded with men and women. All the rulers of the Philistines were there, and on the roof were about 3,000 men and women watching Samson perform. And then Samson prayed to the Lord. He said, "Sovereign Lord, remember me. Please, God, strengthen me just once more, and let me with one blow get revenge on the Philistines for my 2 eyes." And then Samson, he reached toward the 2 central pillars on which the temple stood. Bracing himself against them, his right hand on the one and his left hand on the other, Samson said, "Let me die with the Philistines." And then he pushed with all his might, and down came the temple on the rulers and all the people in it. Thus he killed many more when he died than while he lived. This is a violent and primitive story that took place in a violent and primitive time. It's a story of a man who was set apart from birth, dedicated to God, and whose purpose was to deliver the nation of Israel from Philistine control. A purpose that was achieved, even if it wasn't an intentional decision made by Samson. I'm curious, the good that Samson could have done with his strength. He made so many mistakes, let so many things distract him that he lost sight of his God-given purpose. And our bottom line presents that problem. Lost purpose leads to wasted potential. Now, looking at Samson's story, what can you and I, what can we learn about what distracted him from his purpose and apply it to our lives? Well, distraction number 1 is first, he ignored wise advice. He had taken the Nazirite vow, knew he was to be dedicated to God, yet still indulged in the things he shouldn't have. At the very beginning, His parents told him not to marry the woman from Timnah. Is it possible that he could have achieved his purpose some other way without so many people dying? How about you? When have you ignored the wisdom of somebody else? Maybe you've been told over and over that you should see a doctor, but your stubbornness has kept you from taking care of yourself. Or maybe you've recognized that you're stuck. You're stuck in life, feeling like you have no purpose. You've been told to get out more and meet new people, but your fear and your anxiety, they've crippled you from taking that step. Is that you? The second distraction that kept Samson from his purpose was his need for revenge. How many times did we hear Samson say, since they did that, I'll do this? It was a bloody back and forth that didn't end until Samson lost his own life. Now, your situations may not be as bloody as Samson's, but do you still hold on to the wrongs of someone else? Have you stopped talking to that one family member because of what they said or did to you? Got outworked by a coworker, so now you gossip behind their back. Staying in a revenge mindset keeps you stuck in a cycle of retribution that stifles your potential. It holds you back. Or maybe you used to be part of the church. You attended one of the campuses on the weekend and maybe even joined a group. You got involved, you served. But then something happened. You got hurt. You got overlooked. You disagreed. And now, in an effort to avoid getting hurt again, you self-protect. You decide it's better to watch church from a distance. Safe enough to still feel like you are a part of the community, and yet too far to really make a difference or be known. Is that you? The last thing that kept Samson distracted from his purpose was that he didn't surround himself with the right people. From the Philistine men and women to Delilah, Samson chose bad company. And like the Bible says, bad company corrupts good morals. So take an inventory. Are your friends helping you become a better human being? Do they encourage you? Do they build you up? Do they challenge you? Or do they keep you down? Do they complain all the time? Do they treat you and others poorly? Now, if you have felt like you've lost your purpose or you never knew your purpose to begin with, there's still hope. As long as you have breath in your lungs, there is still hope. Romans 8:28 says that in all things, God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. God will always find a way to fulfill his purpose. And if God can use a ding-dong like Samson to complete his purpose, it's not too late for you. We have all made mistakes, but God's grace gives us a way out so that we can, in the words of Harry from Dumb and Dumber, totally redeem ourselves. So here's my encouragement. Now remember the first distraction. You ignored wise advice before, okay? So now it's time to listen to Brian's wise words, okay? Wisdom. I'm bringing it. First wise word I have for you. Join a group. Yes, I know you hear us talk about this all the time, and there's a reason for that. Find a group that interests you or people who can help you rediscover your purpose. And maybe it's not an official Cedar Creek group, one where you have to go on the website and sign up, but surround yourself with good people. People who can help you become a better human. Y'all, that is one of my favorite things about the church when it is operating healthy. And in a healthy way, we have people who are being authentic and real and vulnerable, which means you are not alone because we have all experienced it. We've all been there. And when we're being honest with ourselves, man, that's community. And we were created and designed to be in a community. In fact, we can't grow. You can't grow, find, or even fulfill your purpose in isolation. We need people. We need people, and we need to be in relationships. If you haven't found your people, don't give up. Keep going. Second wise word from me, Brian, an easy one: forgive. What are you still holding on to? What hurts have you not let go of that have kept you bitter and resentful? And I was being facetious. This is probably the hardest one to do. Forgiveness isn't easy, and it doesn't happen overnight, but do the hard work. If it involves going to therapy, go to therapy. Be free of the chains that keep you from experiencing freedom. In fact, Paul says in Galatians 5:1, it is for freedom that Christ has set us free. And often we get it in our minds that the only thing that Christ has freed us from was sin, so we can go to heaven, which, yes, awesome. I love that. But he has freed us for the here and for the now. He has freed us from all of those things, every single one of those things that keep us chained, that keep us hindered from living our real, full lives, burden-free. That's what he has freed us from. And so if you trust that, if you choose to pursue forgiveness, then you, your friends, and your family will be better for it. Finally, if you've lost your purpose or you never knew what your purpose is, I want to encourage you to join Growth Track. Growth Track is designed to help you discover your purpose so that you can make a difference in the world around you and ultimately find fulfillment. Samson, he knew he was gifted with strength. Do you know your gifts? In week 2 of Growth Track, we help folks discover how they are wired and what gifts God has given them. And so if you've never taken that step to join Growth Track, I've got great news. We're starting it next week. It's a 4-week course helping you discover your purpose, and we offer it at all of the campuses, including online. I know there are many of you who can't get to a physical campus. Sign up and join me online for Growth Track. Now, I believe that when you do all of these things, a ripple effect will go out. It will go out to our families, to our jobs, to our communities. And not only will we live more purpose-filled lives, but we'll also help others do the same. Will you pray with me? God, thank you for this truth. Thank you first for this weird, bloody, violent story of Samson, God, but yet it's real. It's real. And so thank you for the lessons that we can learn from this, God, that you have given all of us a purpose. And when we keep our eyes focused on you, we surround ourselves with the right people, God, and we continue to pursue you, you will show us the purpose you have.